I think if we could just forget that it's recording and then just talk, and then obviously you have questions, I do too, and I'm going to start because that
Mm.
that whole jail thing, that whole
Again?
working in the
Yeah, yeah,
prisons,
yeah.
you shocked me
Mm.
because I had no idea that's where you got your start, and the way you said it in your funny comedian way, there was a moment where I thought you were the one in prison, and then that started your
I've
mindset
made that mistake
career.
before. I've made the mistake of sort of saying, yeah, so when I left prison about 12 years ago, and then you see people go, that's not what I expected.
So what can we expect? How did this start for you? What's your story?
How it started, I mean, it started like many people's kind of careers journey do, just like by accident in many ways. So I studied psychology at university in many ways just because it seemed like that was the easiest, most logical progression from the exams that I took when I was at school. And I loved it. And also it it was kind of a semi-conscious decision. Then I studied psychology, and I thought, okay, well, I guess what's next is some other, I guess I've got to go down the psychology line because again, I was just running on rails. And forensic psychology was the one which seemed, yeah, it's just on a very kind of gut level, just seemed most interesting because forensic psychology is psychology in the context of the prison of the criminal justice system. So I did a master's in forensic psychology, and then I had a couple of other jobs in between. So I found myself at one point working for the police. So I was working as a criminal intelligence analyst for the police, which sounds a lot cooler than it really is. It's very much like number crunching and using data and statistics to help investigate and solve crimes. But what I really wanted to be doing was working in a kind of a therapeutic way. And so I got a job as a trainee forensic psychologist, initially in a prison I probably shouldn't actually give too many details, but initially in a prison that was entirely, it was all, everyone there was on a life sentence, which meant they were either, they had at least one or a series of very serious violent offences in their past. And so I went in, I can't remember what age I was. I must have been like 24, 25, super fresh-faced, super naive, and then found myself in this really intense environment, um, ill-equipped, probably in lots of ways, but you know, man, a hell of a lot of learning goes on in that kind of place.
And do you and you were there for 12 years?
No, no, not 12 years.
Oh, okay.
Probably, I think I was at that place for about 3 years, probably,
Mm,
and then so probably about 12 years in total working in that context. Now, some of that time was
okay.
working in like for a charity in a learning and development capacity, um, helping train up people who are working in prisons. But I probably was in a prison environment for about 6 or 7 years in total, and then about 5 years in a learning and development role. So sometimes going in, but not actually embedded in there anymore, thankfully.
And what was the greatest lesson you think that culture, that environment taught you that perhaps you wouldn't have learned elsewhere?
I think a couple of things, and I think the first one is maybe might sound very obvious, but it's really about seeing the person behind the crime. Because usually what would happen first is before I started working with somebody, I would read their file, and sometimes you'd read things that on paper, well, that were profoundly shocking, and so it's very easy to kind of create a story in your mind about the person you're about to go and meet. And then when you actually sit down opposite them and start talking, you come to realize that, I don't know, it is just another human being sitting opposite me. And obviously they're there for a reason. And what they've done, sometimes was atrocious and can't be excused. But it makes me realize that it's a big mistake to boil someone down just to the worst thing that they've ever done. And that people would often say, "How can you work with these people? They've done atrocious things." Because especially in that men's prison, everyone there was there for often very serious violent crimes. Um, so people would sometimes say, well, how can you possibly work with them? And it really was just about trying to sort of connect with the human being sitting opposite you, who invariably had their own history of trauma, who invariably the thing they were there for was one of the worst experiences, most traumatic experiences of their life as well. And I guess my thought was the only way to work constructively with a person is to see the person. And and even and going beyond that, we used to get called the terminology for people like me in prisons that the guards would use was care bears. They'd go, "Oh, he's off to see the care bears." Because as far as they were concerned, we were just there to go, "Oh, it's poor you, you're in prison," and we were just there to care for them in a way that they just saw as being like soft and ineffectual. But I'm always very clear. I'm also here for a reason. I'm not here just to sort of stroke you and make you feel better. I'm here to connect with you as an individual. Yes, in service of you, the person, but also you will at some point be out in the world again. And unless someone like me is willing to connect with you as a human being and help you, build a life beyond the worst thing you've ever done, you'll continue to be a risk. But if we can work together constructively, it's good for you and it's good for the world. Because absolutely, I met people who went out and I know they went out and built positive, fulfilling, purposeful lives, you know, after what can often be a very dehumanizing experience.
Yeah. Not to, it's a very serious topic, but you mentioned Care Bears, and immediately I used to love the Care Bears cartoon, and immediately I was like, okay, what superpower would you have on your belly?
Hmm,
I was like,
that's
because
a
I
good.
just thought of the main Care Bear,
With a
Tender
Care Bear
Heart,
stare.
the Care Bear
Yeah,
stare. What would be your superpower?
good question. I like to think it would be maybe like, super listening. Because, again, the key always has to be to try and, not just listen to what the person's saying to, but almost listen beyond the words. What's not being said? You know,
Mhm,
where is something being revealed that you can engage with that's beyond just the
mhm,
words that are being said? Um, and again, not that I'm always a good listener, but I think I'm good at noticing when I drift. And I think I'm also I can also be quite honest. And this was me as a psychologist. This was me as a coach. Sometimes with the best one in the world, you'll be talking to someone, or they'll be talking to you, and your mind just goes whoop and starts to drift away. And I absolutely had a couple of bad experiences when that like really bit me on the arse. Like for instance, I obviously had disengaged at some point in the past with a person, and I asked them, well, do you think when you get out, you might go and live with your mum? And her face fell, and she said, I told you last week that my mum had died. And I thought,
Oh, oh,
um, so something I always try and do now, again, whether I'm coaching someone or if it's even in a group session, if I notice I've drifted and missed something, I'll just be like, you know what, I'm really sorry. My mind drifted for a second now. I lost concentration. Can you just say what you said again? So rather than try and bluff, just be honest and say, I drifted. I missed what you just said. Please tell me
right.
again.
Yeah. Goodness. The ability to be honest, the ability to be open, and the ability, I mean, that lesson, you'll never forget that story because it hit you emotionally
Yeah.
more than consciously.
Yeah.
And then that made you actually learn the lesson.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, John, we do like we come from very different,
Mm.
you came from prison psychology, criminal forensic
Yeah.
psychology, and I came from sport. But it's interesting, you said that some of these people actually, unless they're repeated criminals, we shouldn't be defined
Mm.
by one thing, whether
Absolutely.
it's one success or one huge. I don't even know whether I would call it a mistake, like because I don't know if these people would call it a mistake intentional. But in sports, one of the things that I work with athletes is if they do make one big mistake, they do have one big failure, suddenly they think that this is what's going to define them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
Or vice versa, if they have one success, suddenly now that's going to define them.
That's what I was going to
And it,
ask. I mean, in a way, I was thinking in sport, the outcome or the goal seems so central to the whole process. Like, you either, and you often hear a lot of kind of wisdom or storytelling around this, you're either first or nothing. What's the impact of that, of there being such a specific, discrete kind of goal or objective that I can imagine must sometimes seem kind of overpowering.
I think it is very overpowering and dominating in your thought. And it's unfortunate because it's false. If we
Mm,
look at the best athletes in any sport, the best athletes didn't have one success.
mm,
What separates the great are consistently. It's what
mm,
they do consistently. And if they win one world championship, if they win one championship, it's not enough for them. They want to do it again
mm,
or something else. It's not like, okay, I'm done. I completed that goal. Yet when you're striving for it's that one goal and you think it's going to mean everything. And then the
mm,
reality is it doesn't. It's consistent. Every name that all of us would know of, even if I don't play cricket, like
mm,
every popular sport or every popular athlete that we all know of, it wasn't because of one win or one failure. It's consistent performance.
yeah.
And
But
so
then,
perhaps that's,
yeah. So I tried to cut up, but yeah, I guess then my mind goes to, well, and then what? Because let's say you're consistently successful throughout your career. And so, your self-esteem, your sense of self is based on one particular success, one particular failure. But every athlete's career comes to an end. And what came to mind for me, there was do you know Johnny Wilkinson?
no.
A slightly kind of British reference, but he's a very
Okay.
famous rugby player. And
Okay.
he was known for being absolutely fastidious with his preparation, almost scientific and obsessive around the way that he prepared. Every part of his life was focused on, will this make me play better? And, the holy grail of the rugby world is winning the Rugby World Cup. And England won the Rugby World Cup back in the, I think, early 2000s in a very dramatic fashion. Basically, there was like 5 seconds left, 10 seconds left on the clock, and he received the ball and kicked, they call a drop goal, takes it in open play, kicks it between the posts. That was the winning play, and England win the World Cup. And everyone's celebrating. You can see the video now, and he's celebrating, and everyone's going wild. But he's since gone on to say that that was the lowest moment of his life because the holy grail, the thing he'd been working for his entire life is now achieved, and immediately he went to what now? And I just wonder about, the what now for professional athletes when they either achieve the pinnacle of success or when their career comes to an end.
Yeah. It's a really challenging it's a real challenge because on one hand you're told that it's the only thing that matters.
Mm,
He had it ingrained in himself, probably not just him doing it to himself, probably others and everyone who's counting on him.
mm,
It's a business, right? Telling him that this is the only thing that matters. And then when it's over, now what? And I think that's the worst thing that we can all do is create this whole identity and this whole, just you have to I think when we dive into anything, I mean, you and I are even in our careers, I mean, you may have what you believe would make you okay, now I've achieved the greatest achievement
mm,
that I could have in my career, and I've thought about that for myself, and in a moment it's like, okay, that's the target,
mm,
and it's the only thing that matters. But at the same time, for our overall health and well-being and living a long life full of fulfillment and achievement, we also somewhere have to know that that is not the only thing that matters. Yet we have to
mm,
pretend it does in the moment, and we have to behave it like it does.
mm,
But then also understanding that it doesn't. And if he was working with someone like me, if I had an opportunity to work with him, it's this understanding that yes, everything you're doing, all of your preparation, your meticulous focus for this matters. And I don't want to say the word pretend, but it's an understanding that you're going to commit everything and sacrifice everything for this one World Cup.
mm.
And then life will go on. So it's just that little bit of understanding that life isn't over once you hit this goal.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to integrate. but it's super important at the same time. So for myself, if I were to have this big career goal, okay, if I'm able to work with this type of athlete, or if I get to go to this World Cup as a sports psychologist, or if I get to speak on this stage to this audience, check, I've done,
Mm.
that's the best that could ever happen. And I could put all my force, all my effort, everything into that. But I also now, because of the training we have, I also know that life isn't over at that moment. And that's probably what he didn't really have ingrained in him, didn't really understand.
At the time, yeah, at the time, certainly. What's interesting is he's gone on to almost like a second career in a not dissimilar world to the one that we inhabit. And I don't know if you use these terms specifically, but I'm thinking about what you were talking about for a moment there. It felt like you were talking about number one, the importance of creating a distance between the roles that you play in life and the person that you are. And number two, something about a broader sense of purpose that transcends the things that you do. And I'd be interested just to ask you about those two things. What do you think about the importance of creating that separation between me and the roles that I play? And where do you see the whole subject of purpose coming in when it comes to, life in general, but particularly working with athletes?
I mean, that's the work that you and I do. When we talk
Mm,
about purpose, one of the exercises we go through is figuring out who you are when you're your best.
mm,
And it's not how you throw the ball. It's not how you write a book. It's how you contribute to those roles. And then that becomes more of your identity
mm,
than anything else. And then for today's purpose, I'm applying my identity to this role.
mm.
I'm applying my identity to this role. And the thing about that is that it creates, I think we call what I call it is unshakable confidence and almost like an unshakable purpose.
I like that.
It doesn't come and go so easily with the rules. First of all, rules change, and sometimes they're change. They change when we don't want them to change. Like you were just telling a story of you were working with someone who lost her mother. So the role of daughter changed.
Mm,
The role of friend changes, the role of spouse changes, the roles just in that family relationship structure changes. Our careers change, so those roles change. And as an athlete, roles change. One minute you're an athlete, one minute you're not a professional athlete, or one minute you're on this team, the next minute you're on another team, or and that's sometimes chosen, it's sometimes forced.
mm.
And if we're going to attach our purpose to that role, we're giving ourselves a lot of room for unhappiness, I think, and a lot of disappointment and a lot of pressure. But
Absolutely. Yeah.
if we,
Because then you become
but
attached to that role, don't you, in a way that might be
course,
unhealthy.
of course, and then it becomes your identity.
Mm. Yeah,
And then if we can sit in our best self and, look to see what the qualities and our values,
mm,
and then we apply that to all the roles we play. But I do though appreciate some people like in the moment. This project is, and we hear it all the time, and everyone, no matter what they're doing in life, in this moment, being a mom, because I just had a newborn baby, it's the only thing that matters.
mm,
Or I'm on this project at work and we're working weekends and we're working long hours and there's deadlines and it's the only thing that matters. Or in sport,
mm.
this World Cup is the only thing that matters. Or you and me, we write books in the moment. It's the only thing that matters. But if we're totally attached to that as our identity, oh, that opens up to a whole lot of problems when that role ends.
That feels like an important distinction, like the distinction between dedication and attachment. Because I would never want to suggest to anyone, don't be too dedicated because it's risky. No, no, dedication is, I think it's a guy called Russ Harris. I think he's the person I heard this from, and he's very prominent in the world of acceptance and commitment therapy. And he's got a phrase which is hold your values lightly, but pursue them vigorously. If
Mm,
there's stuff in life that's important to you, man, go for it. Give it everything, but hold it lightly. Because once we start to hold on to it too tight, once we start to become attached to anything, then it becomes risky. Then our identity becomes kind of intertwined with that thing. And then, and that puts us at risk because, like you said, roles do change. It's so interesting. We come from, different backgrounds, but I've told you this story before, but and this brings a purpose piece in as well. So I'm a dad, and it's I've experienced how you can feel compelled to completely become attached to that as being your primary role in life, and your identity necessarily becomes intertwined with it. And also, I can see the importance of keeping a sense of this is me and this is my purpose, distinct from any role you might play. I mean, like I say, I think we spoke about this before, but I used to work in prisons and I used to work in a women's prison. And one of the things I would often do would be like assessment interviews with people when they came in, specifically around their substance misuse. There was a period of time when I was particularly working with people around drug and alcohol use. And a common experience was I'd sit down with someone to do an assessment interview and I'd say, tell me your story. And basically what they'd say is, well, I started using heroin at the age of 18. I'm 42 years now, 42 years old now. I've been using, non-stop for the past 26 years. But then I'd see in their file that they've got a couple of kids. And I'd say, how about when you were pregnant with those kids? Were you using then? And very often they'd say, oh, no, 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 of course not. No, not when I was pregnant, I stopped. As if it was the most obvious thing in the world. But, you don't just stop using heroin. It's a profoundly mentally, emotionally, spiritually addictive, physically addictive substance. So you go through hell to come off heroin. But during that 9 months when they're pregnant with those kids, you could say the purpose, the why for quitting heroin was strong enough for them to stay clean for that period of time. So on one hand, you could say, wow, the power of purpose is amazing. The power of motherhood or parenthood in the service of purpose is amazing. That, things that you can do. And I would absolutely agree with that. And
Yeah.
also, you know, I was having that conversation with these women behind bars. And for many of them, so they had relapsed. And for many of them, they were not going to see their kids again. That door had shut because they'd been taken into care. And yeah, they may not see them again. And what was interesting to notice, I wouldn't say it's quite as clear cut as this, but some women would leave prison and then come back again and then leave and come back and be on that kind of roller coaster. They couldn't because they couldn't find stability in their lives. Some would leave and we'd never hear from them again and you don't know what happened. And others would leave and then come back as a volunteer or come back as a mentor.
Mhm.
And you would learn, or they would just keep in touch via letters, and you'd learn that they'd really built purposeful, happy, meaningful lives. And like I say, it's too much to say this is the difference, but I think a difference was the ones who were able to go out and rebuild their lives were the ones who were able to connect with a sense of purpose that was beyond any role they might inhabit in life, beyond their role as mother or father or prisoner or daughter or whatever. They're able to find a sense of purpose that was just about them and what they wanted to contribute to the world and the impact they wanted to have and who they were at their best. That feels for me like a more stable, more consistent, more, um, a safer place to locate your purpose rather than just in your kids. And I mention that because often when I have conversations with people around purpose, it's like to be the best dad I can be, to be the best mum I can be. To which I say, cool. And also, what's underneath that role? How do you want to be a parent? How do you want to be a business owner? How do you want to be an athlete? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
That personal
absolutely.
sense of purpose that transcends a role and that can help you achieve amazing things, even really difficult things.
Mhm. That whole be my best, I understand the concept. I think it's weak.
Mm,
Um, just to be so direct and blunt,
mm,
because it's abstract and we don't really, there's no real, what does that even look like?
mm,
And we can let ourselves off the hook very easily. And so we always tell ourselves, just go out there and give it your best. But what you and I are talking about is what making that best as tangible as we can make it.
mm,
What does that look like? What are the qualities? What are the values? What are those interactions? What specifically, and then it becomes more tangible. Now, it then means we're putting more responsibility on ourselves because then we have to go and deliver those specific things instead of just saying, well, I tried, I
mm.
tried to be my best. Becomes more, we're forced to take more responsibility. But I think the benefit is far outweighs the work we'll have to do to
Yeah.
dissect what it means to be your best. I think it's yeah,
Then
it's really cool.
well, then it becomes tangible, doesn't it? It becomes practical. Because I think the risk is
Hmm.
sometimes when you start talking about values and purpose, it can kind of feel abstract.
Hmm.
Um, so there's something here about thinking, well, if purpose is the why, then what are the what's the day-to-day things that you do, the day-to-day actions or behaviors that you can apply this purpose or these values to? And getting, am I right in thinking you're talking here about being very specific about, okay, if your values are dedication, courage, and kindness, how will you practically apply these to the way that you approach your life, the way you approach your parenting, the way you approach your work, the way you approach your sport? Is that what we're saying? Just try to really make it clear in terms of behavior.
Are those your values? You listed them so quickly. Are those yours?
It's a good question. Because I mean, I do think sometimes in this line of work too, you can become, I don't know, almost a bit complacent. I think I did have a feeling a few years ago that I'd become, people, someone would ask me what are my values, and I'd go, kindness, fun, creativity, because I'd said that a million times, and I think I'd kind of stopped thinking about it.
Interesting.
Um, and it's funny that what were the ones I just said there? I think it was dedication, courage, and kindness.
Kindness.
I'll be honest with you, in terms of where I am right now in life, they feel absolutely relevant because, yeah, I'm sort of trying to make some kind of career transitions or some life transitions in general, and it takes courage to move into new territory, and it takes dedication to do something other than the easiest thing in the world, which is just more of what you've done in the past. And also along the way, I want to make sure I don't detach from, a kind of a sense of kindness and connection with other people. So yeah. It's interesting what the mind pops up when you're not really thinking too hard.
Yeah, and then you actually have to look at what that means. So, what does courage mean? So, I'm a visual person, so I would think of like a lion, courageous. But then I don't know that I really believe that. As we were talking, I just created this master class and we were talking, and one of the topics is self-belief. And I believe self-belief is earned. And how is it earned? And I like the acronym PRIDE. I didn't come up with it by myself, but the acronym PRIDE, personal responsibility in delivering excellence.
Mhm.
And the way I explained it is every day, how do we take personal responsibility in delivering excellence? Is having the courage to open your eyes and explore what's out there. And
Mm,
then expose yourself to just something every single day and to be curious and instead of judgmental to be curious. And
mm,
so you could even, if you want, you could even take it deeper. The whole reason I bring that up is I just think, especially when with the work that you and I do, which is the mind
mhm.
and emotions, we can't see those muscles growing like a bicep curl, like a
Yeah,
biceps. So these ways we can break it down and then, okay, I exposed myself to something new today. I opened my mind and I started researching and I started looking outside to see what was open for me. I was curious about something instead of judgmental. To me, that's being courageous. And so when
mhm.
we can break it down even more, it's just so much easier to take that next step forward.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, do you see parallels between, let's say, physical growth and development and emotional growth and development, mental, spiritual growth and development?
I absolutely do. When you were telling me your story, oh, now I forget his name, but hold on to it with everything you've got, but also
Yeah,
let it go. I
hold
forget,
the values lightly, but pursue them vigorously.
pursue them vigorously, hold them lightly. So immediately I thought of myself yesterday.
Mhm.
So yesterday I was mountain biking. And I'm 4 years into this sport, but it is by far my most feared sport. And, you're going over rocks and boulders. And we were doing this one trail right across from our house. And I've done it now many, many times, but there's this one section that I've maybe now completed it twice, but I've probably gone over it with walking my bike, 50 times.
Mm,
And it's a challenge every single time. And the guidance that I got from Eric as we were going through, he's like, you got to be calm. And funny enough, And I know that because that's what I tell my athletes. He's kind of my sports psychologist. But funny enough, when I told myself or demanded myself to be calm, my body also kind of took the foot off the gas, if you will, kind of let, so I wasn't pursuing it vigorously
Mm,
while I was letting go of how important this is to get over.
mm,
And even just to be calm in mind, to take a nice calm breath and to just, calm emotionally and mentally. And yesterday, I thought to myself, I have to be calm emotionally and mentally, but not physically. Physically, I
mm,
still have to pursue this. I still have to give it strength. I still have to push down on that pedal. I can't let up
mm,
physically. And I did it. And it was probably the second or third time that I've ever done it. But it was that combination of pursuing it vigorously.
mm.
And that was like the physical pursuit. But mentally and emotionally, I had to stay calm and detached
Yeah.
to some extent. And so I do think we can learn all of these tools and it applies to physical, mental, emotional, spiritual.
In fact, so I've got a very specific question, and maybe I'm looking for an answer that isn't there. But I still do. But I used to love track and field, and like
Mm-hmm.
back in the golden era of kind of track and field when it was like, Carl Lewis and Linford Christie and all this, the sprinters, and, Usain Bolt.
Yeah.
But I used to love watching the footage. You have the head on camera watching the sprinters coming towards you. And what used to fascinate me was you'd see their faces like going burr, burr, right from side, like flopping around, um, as they're moving in this powerful but also very graceful kind of way. And often what happened is someone would be leading until about 50 yards to go or 50 meters to go, and then the commentator would say he's starting to tighten up, and their movement would start to get tight, and then they'd slow down. And I always
Mm-hmm.
thought there was something that I've always thought there seemed to be something about they need to sort of stay somewhat relaxed in order to unleash their peak performance. And once they start to get tight, it begins to hinder them. And I feel like I'm just throwing that to you and sort of saying something, make something out of that. But there seems to be some kind of relationship between, you know, accessing a place of being somewhat relaxed can bring more explosive performance. The idea that holding on tight is how we, you know, bring that top performance is not necessarily the case.
I think holding on tight is not how you become committed. I think they're two separate things, but I sometimes I think we get confused.
Mm,
And again, it's always nice to make what you and I talk about as tangible as we can be in
mm,
the physical body. When we start like that moment where you start to tense, 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 it's called bracing. It's
right.
almost like, so an easy way to think about it is you have a bicep and a tricep, and they're supposed to work with each other. In other words, when the bicep is relaxed, is when the tricep is working.
Mhm,
That's how I can extend my arm. And when the tricep is relaxed, the bicep's working. That's how I can flex my arm.
mm,
They work with each other. When one is relaxing, the other one is stressing, and then vice versa. But that tense moment where our performance decreases, it's called bracing. It's when all the muscles stress at the same time.
mhm,
And so you conflict. I mean, everything gets restricted, and you certainly lose coordination. You lose blood flow. I mean, everything just gets really, really tight because everything's stressing at the same time.
mm,
When really how our bodies move in coordination and fluidity is, this part of the body is relaxing while the other one's contracting, and then you figure out that pattern for yourself. But you're still committed to that.
mhm.
So there is this practice of staying calm yet not losing that commitment, like you said, that perseverance. But yet at the same time, you have to stay calm. And I do think we need to do that mentally. So often, the saying, don't give me your answer now, go and sleep on it.
Mhm.
Or sometimes when we're trying to figure out a solution, we just can't because we're trying so hard. But if we just allow ourselves to go and relax, we don't give up the commitment. We don't lose the commitment or the desire to find the solution, but we just allow ourselves to relax. Sometimes that's when we come up with the solution in the shower overnight, going for a walk. So I think that's the same type of philosophy. And it's this, well, you teach it. I would love to know a tool and exercise that you give to stay committed, but also to not to be so attached with the pressure and the anxiety that comes with that.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know if I can say I've got a particular exercise necessarily, but I would certainly, absolutely endorse the idea that just sitting and tensing up and trying to think hard about a problem or an issue. And most of us know from our own experience that is not the way that we access our most creative or resourceful selves. But it almost feels like it's ingrained in us. I mean, and I say it's because I've got a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old who are neither, they're both now outside of, let's say, mainstream schooling. Um, and I just think how, when I was a kid, this is what you're taught. You're taught, aren't you, that a productive person, that a good boy or girl who's learning well is someone who sits still in their seat and listens and doesn't move and doesn't talk. And if I remember getting told off when I was a kid for looking out of the window, and I was told you're daydreaming. I remember at the time thinking, oh, I've been bad. I was daydreaming, and now I think, number one, you don't know what was happening in my head, and number two, what's wrong with daydreaming? Because as adults, I think most of us have come to realize that we don't do our best thinking, staring, you know, tensely into the laptop screen. That when you get up and walk and move and go from the head into the body, and when you take a break, yeah, often that's when the answers spontaneously emerge. I mean, I had an amazing experience a few weeks ago when I was asked to do a particular presentation, a 45-minute keynote talk on a particular topic, and I spent weeks wrestling with it. Not really in a dedicated way, but wrestling with it in here. So many ideas, but I wasn't sure what was right. And so I drove my car out to the countryside, a place called Stanmer Park near where I live, which is, rolling hills and, um, it's in a place called the South Downs. And in the time it took me, I parked my car and I thought I'd walk up a path through some fields to a tea room, which is nice in English for you. And it took about 15 minutes to make that walk. And by the time I got to the tea room, I was like, I'll have a flat white, please. And I had to sit down and open my laptop because the idea was there. The idea had formed in that 15 minutes. And it just kind of tumbled out onto the page, fully formed. But that clarity only came after weeks of grappling. But as soon as I walked and experienced nature, everything just went chunk and just fell into place. And so I'm a huge advocate of trying to break that story that we do our best work when we're sitting and wrestling intellectually with a problem, staring into the screen. I just think that cuts our capacity so much.
Oh yeah. And then I don't know for you, but then when I do find that moment, so I've taken myself away and now I'm, suddenly, aha, like, oh, that's the story that I want to write about, or that's the thing. Then I can sit down and then I'm in it. Then I'm in it. And then, time just flies. Maybe you call that, maybe that's an experience of flow that time just flies by. Other people would say time slows down, but to me, it's like I look up and wow, it's already been 3 hours and I've just
Mm.
been in it. But if I'm trying to find that, if I'm trying to figure something out, I'm with you. I just need to not lose the commitment. It's something that I desire, but I need to go for a walk. I need to go and enjoy, my significant other. I need to go and just leave it be, but also trust that it's not completely leaving my mind. It's in there. My mind still wants to solve this problem,
Yeah.
but I just don't want to force it. And then the ideas are brilliant, if I could say so myself sometimes, or at least it makes sense to me. Suddenly something finally clicks.
Well, it's a different part of your mind is engaging with the problem, isn't it? I think, we sort of fetishize the old prefrontal cortex. This is the money maker, and it's amazing, obviously, but sometimes you just have to allow the thinking mind to release a problem and let the unconscious mind start to play with it a little bit. But
Yeah.
it's hard though. It's a hard thing to do because, like I say, that's the cultural story, isn't it? This is the money maker. You know what I mean? I feel like Western culture in general and work culture especially, we're kind of fixated on the brain and we live from here up. And I think my my belief is that that is part of why we've got this kind of burnout epidemic, because we forget that we live from here down as well, that the body actually exists and it's not just a tool, it's not just a thing to take your mind from meeting to meeting. It's actually, connection with the body. And I guess it goes back to the sports piece. Connection between mind and body is essential to being sustainable. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And your whole daydreaming, it's interesting. I actually just did a post a couple of weeks ago about this. There's a television show called Suits. Have you ever heard of it?
I mean, we know it over here because Meghan Markle. I mean, I think
Okay, of course, of course. Who am I? Of
Meghan
course.
Markle of it is the primary thing we
Okay.
associate.
I actually love the show. I've seen it now. I've watched it now twice. It's an old show, but it's newly on. And there's this scene, they're lawyers, and the management, so the named partner, managing partner walks, along, and she sees Meghan Markle. Actually, she sees her character staring out the window, and she walks in and she goes, "We don't pay our lawyers to stare out the window." And I thought to myself, well, maybe we should. Maybe we should, because that's when we're going to come up with those brilliant ideas. That's when something's going to make sense. And then you turn around and you sit down and you start writing your motion or whatever you're doing as an attorney or anything else that we do in our careers or lives.
Well, and also it's a way of giving ourselves that permission to just take a little mental break. Creativity can come from there. And also there's something here about kind of preserving your resources and preserving your energy, because you and I connected initially because, we were working in the world of energy management, and how do we maintain our energy over the course of the day so we can be effective and creative, but also so we don't end up burning out. And there's a colleague of ours and mine, called Tamzin Benet, and I'm going to tell a story that I've heard her tell. But so she used to work in military air flight control, and so she would be on a monitor, you know, tracking dozens of aircraft and making sure that they're I'm not an expert, but making sure that they're safe. And yeah, that's what air traffic controllers do. They make sure that aircraft don't collide, or they don't put themselves at risk of harm. And what she said was that, now I can't remember the exact figure, but there's an incredibly short period of time at which operators are allowed to be actively on console, and then they have to take a break. I feel like it's as little as 30 minutes, because the understanding is that the investment of mental energy in that 30 minutes is so intense that if they're on for any longer, they their performance will start to decline. And of course, if performance declines when you're an air traffic controller, well, planes can crash and people can die. They prioritize it and they make it a part of it's a contractual obligation to take breaks every, say, 30 minutes. And it just occurs to me that in almost every other industry, people are doing stuff that really, really matters. Maybe it's not quite as immediate as a plane crashes and people die, but people are doing work that matters, and but maybe aren't compelled or even encouraged or empowered to take those regular breaks that they need to stay at peak performance. And
Yeah,
there's something so important about giving yourself permission to take those breaks, because otherwise we start to, performance starts to decline, energy starts to go down, and we can't be our best.
yeah. And this is where I get a little bit, with the work that you and I do, we're in front of employees, we're in front of people who work for big organizations, and often we hear that we don't have the time, back to back meetings. And I do get that. I do get that. And I also drive it home because I also just this week I had scheduled a 90-minute training call, but I intentionally only planned for 60 minutes.
Mhm.
And then, basically we were going to give them back those 30 minutes. So no excuse. And they were quite open to say that they have 30 minutes like that and they don't take it.
Mhm.
So it's, I always, whenever I'm working with someone one on one, we need to get to the truth of it,
Yeah.
because people will say, I don't have the time. My boss wouldn't let me. It doesn't, well, let's really look at this.
Mm.
And as I know, even though you have 30 minutes, sometimes all it needs is one 3-minute song.
Absolutely.
One, stick your head out the window and just take one, 30-second breath of fresh air.
Mm.
And we don't do that. And I think we just have to dip the toe. In other words, I feel like we just need to start practicing it. And it doesn't have to be perfect. So if you do have 30 minutes, just take 1 minute and
Mhm.
just stare out the window. Just dip the toe.
Mm.
And I think I don't think you're going to suddenly, it's not going to be like night and day where suddenly I have all this energy if I just took 1 minute recovery and, for the first time in my life. But I think the flip side to help us get our heads around this concept is I didn't ruin anyone's life by
Mhm.
taking 3 minutes to myself.
Yeah.
And I didn't ruin my own life. I didn't ruin my own flow. And if I can buy into what everybody now in high performance is talking about, which is again taking this little detachment from and relaxation, maybe this thing actually will have legs.
Mm.
But I think the first question people ask themselves is, was that amazing? Well, it may not be amazing the first time you do it. I think the better question is, did I ruin anyone's life by
Mm.
taking 30, even if you do take the whole 30 minutes, taking 30 minutes for myself? Did I suddenly upset my entire family
Mhm.
because I came home 30 minutes late after work for myself?
Mm.
I think we need to test that theory,
Mm.
and so that you're not harming anyone. And then, well, if the research says this is going to work and I'm not ruining anyone's life by doing it, maybe I can slowly buy into it. I mean, you and I do it. I do it every day.
Mhm.
I even start my day with a relaxation as opposed to starting my day with getting up and just going straight to my stressors.
Yeah. I mean, I see. I love the idea of starting your day with something because I once heard someone use the metaphor that those kind of mechanical balls that you get, like let's say it's like it's a movie, it's Roadhouse with Patrick Swayze and it's some kind of dive
Yeah.
bar and there's a
Oh, there's a
mechanical
new
ball.
Roadhouse now. It's an
I
updated
know,
version.
but I'm a Swayze Roadhouse man. The
I
Gyllenhaal
am too.
version.
I am too. What Jake? No offense to Jake.
It's not
I
him,
forget his
but
last name.
no, right. But I heard once someone use the metaphor that many of us, if you're going to ride a mechanical bull, you will get on when it's still, and it will then slowly start up, and then it
Right.
starts rocking, and you got to hold on tight. But the metaphor was, many of us start the day like, boom, okay, well, let's get on Twitter, and I've got to answer a work email and get the kids ready for school, and it's like trying to jump onto the mechanical bull when it's already in full motion. It's to start the day like that is madness. So to have something that allows you to start the day from a place of, you could say calm or you could say nervous system regulation, just a place of stillness and readiness to engage with the challenges. But when you were talking about how people don't give themselves that permission or don't claim it, I kind of think there's almost a bit of a paradox here that we talk about stress and discomfort as being a source of growth, but important to recover too. But I think there's a paradox that for some people, the opportunity is there to relax or recover, but to do that takes them into discomfort. To
Mm-hmm.
do that is they're so accustomed to constant stimulus that it's
Mm-hmm.
actually uncomfortable to be still. And one of my favorite bits of research to quote is there's a psychologist called Timothy Wilson. This is in 2014, and the short version of the study is that participants in this study were taken into a room where there was nothing. There was no entertainment, no distractions, nothing but a chair in the middle of the room with a little red button on the side. And they were told by the experimenter, right, your job is to sit in this chair for between 5 and 16 minutes. And after between 5 and 16 minutes, I'll come through again and talk to you about the next phase of the experiment. Okay? By the way, if you push the little red button, you'll get a small, harmless, but painful electric shock. And the outcome of the study was the vast majority of people would rather give themselves a series of small, harmless, but painful electric shocks rather than just sit alone with their thoughts for between 5 and 16 minutes. Just being still and doing nothing is so aversive for some people that it's like, I'll give myself a few shocks. So I think that really tells us something about how unaccustomed many of us have become to just being still and not having any kind of stimulus. For many people, it's a real, they have to really lean into discomfort to start to learn that habit.
Yeah. Recovery is a whole lot more like stress at the beginning.
Mm. I I really recognize it. I notice in myself that when there's, a quiet moment occurs in the day and my hand wants to reach for my cell phone, I want to get a little hit. And for me, it takes a conscious, mindful effort to notice that urge and then take a breath and just come back to this 30 seconds of calm, quiet, still time.
Mm, yeah, I think I don't know that I have that problem anymore. I think
Yeah.
we go for walks every morning and I don't bring my phone.
Mm,
Very seldom do I bring my phone for dinner. As long as one person has their phone there, everything's okay. I have a certain numbers memorized, just three now memorized in my head if ever I need to borrow someone's phone. Um, I just know it's such an amazing feeling. The experience is just really, truly wonderful.
mm,
But you're right. I think at the beginning, it feels a whole lot more like stress.
mm,
Therefore, we try to find every reason why we can't do it,
mm.
not allowed to do it. But when you do it, it's truly remarkable.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but in today's world, the research that I've done and the top performers that I learn from, no more are we getting badge of honors for pulling all-nighters. No more is it the cool thing to just work 24/7.
Mm,
The greatest performers are the ones that are going out and relaxing and enjoying their lives, working hard, playing hard, and then relaxing hard as well.
absolutely. I mean, I remember I essentially had kind of a burnout when I was 31 years old. And had to I quit my job. I had, 3 weeks of essentially doing nothing and really had to start to rebuild. But I remember during the time that was all unfolding within me was around the time that President Obama had was in his first presidency. I remember going into work one morning, just like body fizzing with cortisol, just so stressed about the day ahead, and reading a newspaper and seeing his daily schedule. And he would get up at 5, and he's got a meeting with this head of state, and then with the Joint Chief of Staff, and then something about the nuclear codes and incredibly high stakes stuff. So much more high stakes, obviously, than anything I was dealing with, but I was falling apart. But also noticed that he had, 6:30 read bedtime story to Malia. Um, you know, midday, half an hour in the gym. He had recovery breaks and breaks during the day when he was engaging with his family. And I look back now and think, well, maybe that's why. Maybe it wasn't that, I told myself, well, it's easy for him because he's got staff around him but I suspect that maybe that was an important part of his sustainability, but his ability to remain so graceful under so much pressure because he just made sure that he made time for recovery, for physical exercise, and for engaging with the things and people that were important to him.
And he kept the number of decisions he had to make every day in check. And I remember listening to him in an interview saying that he eats the same thing. I mean, obviously, if he's traveling or restaurants or whatnot, but day to day, he eats the same thing every day because he doesn't want to have to, what am I going to eat today? Or
Mm,
what is someone going to feed me today? Be at just one other choice that he has to make. It's already done. So
mm.
the menu is set because he just doesn't want to, he doesn't want to have to deal with yet another choice,
Certainly, there's no
another
time.
decision. And I think all those things that we can practice and bring to, I mean, we basically eat the same thing. Dinners are different, but breakfast and lunch is basically the same because we don't have to bother with, what are just yet another choice. Now, if you're on the road, if we're traveling, then, we have to prepare to the best of our ability, but then we have to be open and make decisions. But when I'm at home, just the decisions are from that perspective, they're very clear. There's not a whole lot of variety. I'll find variety in other aspects of my life, but these things, it makes life more simple so that then I can be more effective in other places.
Makes sense.
And I think values, going back to values, if we can close up with that, to me, the values really help with that. So I have three values. They haven't changed And I do look at them often because the greatest thing about us being able to teach this is we get to learn it every day.
It's valuable to
And
teach.
my values are love, health, and adventure.
Mhm.
And they've been those three for a long time. And so health, now I do love my chocolate, I do love my Nutella, I do love my cookies, but generally speaking, I value health. Therefore, I'm going to make certain decisions because they attach to my health.
Mhm.
I'm not a foodie. I don't because it's just is it nice? Yes, but my value is health. So it makes the decision making much easier and more clear when I'm again leading with my values, leading with my identity, which is, my purpose.